This is Entre Ed Talk, the podcast for entrepreneurial educators by entrepreneurial educators. We are your hosts, Toi Hirschman and
Amber Ravenscroft. This podcast is created by the National Consortium for Entrepreneurship Education, or Entre Ed for short.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Entre Talk podcast. Today we are so excited to bring a very good friend of ours and author, Brian Weisfeld. He has been building businesses his entire life. To go way back in elementary school, he actually bought 95 pounds of gummy bears and hired his friends to sell them. As a teenager, he made and sold mixtapes, some of us remember those, and sorted baseball cards and babysat 4 days a week after school. He sold nuts and dried fruit and more gummy bears in a neighborhood store as well. As an adult, Brian helped build a number of well-known billion-dollar companies, including Imax Corporation and Coupons.com. Brian is the founder and chief squad officer of the Startup Squad, an initiative dedicated to empowering girls to reach their potential, whatever their passions. And he is also the co-author of the Startup Squad, a new novel series to empower young girls to begin their entrepreneurial journeys, and it is published today from Imprint Macmillan. Brian lives in Silicon Valley and can often be found eating gummy bears with his wife while watching his two daughters sell lemonade from the end of their driveway. Welcome, Brian. We are so happy to have you today.
Thank you. It's I'm a big fan of Entre Ed and everything the organization does. So I'm very happy to be here and spend some time with you this morning.
Awesome. We're very happy to have you.
Yeah, I'm pumped about this. First off, there's an intro where the first line has gummy bears. And I have to ask, as an elementary school student, how do you even go about finding, I don't even know where you would source 95 pounds of gummy bears. So tell us a little bit about young Brian.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I wish I knew the answer to that of where I got it from. But you can buy, I just remember you can buy these huge bulk bags. And I guess that's what stores bought. And I truly can't remember where I got my hands on them. But they were like these 20-pound bags of gummy bears. And I bought a bunch of them and then I had my friends hired up. And I basically sold wholesale to my friends. And then my friends would sell retail in school. And I was one of the salespeople as well. And the funny thing is, so this is probably in the 1970s. I've recently found my old ledger. My father was an accountant and I had accounting paper and I have a ledger with like all my friends' names on it and how much they sold on each day. And I'm very proud to say that of the 6 people, I was the highest seller of the whole team. So.
Wow, that's extensive for an elementary school kid. That's incredible. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. And then, I was always doing something. Always had some sort of side gig going while I was in school.
We talk about that a lot, actually. Most of the people that we interview that are entrepreneurial in nature, they started at a super young age just questioning, maybe not to the extent that you had an entire gummy bear business where you were, you managed a workforce. But we always find that there are some similarities with people who at a very young age started with this entrepreneurial mindset. I want to go into, as you progress, clearly you stayed with that entrepreneurial kind of focus. Can you tell us a little bit about how you started and helped grow these major companies Imax and Coupons.com. I've heard of them. I can remember my first Imax movie and how much it blew my mind. So I was wondering if you could kind of walk us through that piece of your life.
Yeah, sure. So when I left college, I took the LSATs and was contemplating going to law school. And at the time, law school had almost become 17th grade. That it was sort of what a lot of my friends and people would do after school. But I realized that I didn't know what people did for a living. Like you're an accountant, you're a lawyer, you're an investment banker. You get to your office, you sit down at your desk, and then what? And while I always thought the law education would be interesting, I didn't think that was going to help me solve that problem. So I got a job working at an investment bank in New York, which allowed me to work with lawyers and accountants and companies. And I actually did a lot of work with private equity firms that were buying and investing in companies. And these people knew the finance better than the investment bankers, and they understood what it took to run a company as well. And my frustration with investment banking was you'd spend 6 or 9 months working to raise $100 million for a company. and then you'd move on to the next deal. But I always thought, well, wouldn't it be more fun to be the guy that just raised all the money to try to build the company? And so I went to work for two guys. They weren't even officially affiliated with each other, but they were two guys looking for companies to invest in and acquire. And the day I joined them, and they said, hey, we're looking at buying this company called Imax, and the bids are due Thursday. And so I spent my first year with them working on the acquisition and the financing, and then actually even the IPO of Imax. We took the company public very quickly after we bought it. And the company was based in Toronto, but I was in New York with the two guys I worked for, and they became the co-CEOs. So I was very fortunate that very early in my career, I had a front row seat at what it took to run and build a publicly traded company. And it was literally the three of us in this office, and myself and the co-CEOs. And so for me, that was an incredible education early in my career. And at the time, there were probably 75 IMAX theaters in the world, and they were all in museums and science centers, and they were all showing educational film. But people walked out of those theaters and said, wow, that was an incredible experience. So the vision of the two guys I worked for was, well, why does it have to be a fish film in a museum? Why can't it be Avengers at the local multiplex? And so that was their vision. And obviously that's the reality of the company today. And amazingly, the guys I bought it with are still there. One guy is the CEO of the company and the other guy is the chairman. So it's been a pretty crazy run since I think it was 1994 when we actually bought the company.
So I remember, I'm just going to reflect on my first IMAX. I remember it was exactly what you said. It was in the Carnegie Science Center in Pittsburgh, and it was on the Sun. And I remember thinking like the same thing. This could be incredible on all these other ones. So I remember my first public movie was Avatar at, again, the Pittsburgh IMAX theater. And my dad, we went and saw it the next day. Again, it's a 2-hour drive from our hometown to Pittsburgh, but he was so blown away by like the IMAX theater itself. So to think about, I'm talking to somebody who has taken that and scaled it to what it was and like how impactful that was to just my family's perspective. That's awesome. That's incredible. I'm really impressed.
Yeah, it was just lucky to be working for them and for them to give me the opportunities that they did. And that really helped to shape my career. And I still consider them mentors to this day.
Wow. How long were you with them? Did you say?
I was there for about 8 years.
Amazing, because you were so young to have that kind of experience.
As I said, just very lucky to have that experience early in my career and to have people that were willing to give me the responsibilities that they did.
So cool. So then how did the coupons.com come in? Because like Amber's experience with IMAX, I'm a mom and I love me some coupons.
Yeah. So I was in New York, and I grew up in New York and spent my whole career in New York, and knew the founder and CEO of coupons.com, and we had been talking for quite some time. And I was looking to leave the job that I was in back east, and he was looking for someone to help run the company. And so I joined him in 2008. And at the time, I think the company was generating probably about $15 or $18 million a year in revenue, and there had about 100 employees. And so I joined him to help him scale and build the business. And in the category of it's better to be lucky than good sometimes, I joined in the summer of 2008. And in the fall of 2008 was when Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns collapsed, and the economy sort of had what started its downfall and went into the giant recession. And so all of a sudden, two things happened. One was people were looking for coupons and discounts more than ever before. And two, the place where they traditionally had gone to look for them was the newspaper. But to save money, people started canceling their newspaper subscriptions, and the internet was really taking off. And so people were looking online for those things. So at the same time that people were looking for coupons more and more, they were also looking for another source of the coupons. And so we were just in the right place at the right time, and grew the company very quickly. And when I left 5 years later, the company had grown from 100 people to 500 people, from $15 million a year of revenue to $150 million of revenue, and was getting ready to file for its subsequent IPO, which it ended up doing. And so again, just a great experience, and one of those being in the right place at the right time.
I remember using that app for the first time, and thinking like I'd hacked groceries. Like like, this doesn't really work. Did I just hack groceries? I bring a whole stack with me.
Yeah, it really is free money just out there, and part of just getting the education of what resources and what coupons were available was a big part of it. And for millennials that would never dream of clipping a coupon out of a Sunday newspaper, to have coupons available on their phone or online was, as I said, we were in the right place at the right time. And I think at the time when I started, the coupon industry was a multi-billion-dollar industry. Only 1 or 2% of it was online and digital. And of that, coupons.com had about 90% market share. And so it was just a matter of getting the market to transition from offline to online and continuing to hold that market share.
Awesome. Can you help clarify? I think this is just for our listeners who might be a little bit unfamiliar with some of the terms. Can you kind of describe quickly what IPO means or why they do that?
Yeah, sure. So an IPO stands for an initial public offering, and it's just the process by which a private company becomes public and starts trading, their stock starts trading on the stock exchanges, the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ. And it's a way for companies to essentially raise money from public investors, and so allow people to be able to buy stock in Imax and be a shareholder in Imax, or in coupons.com, which is actually now called Quotient Technology. They've since changed the name of the company.
That's good to know. And so just for our listeners, some current companies that just went IPO that I really am interested in Pinterest and actually Zoom, which we are using right now for our technology. So they just went public. So I'm really interested in that. This is something new to me. I've just got into like the idea of stocks. And I think it's something that's really not talked enough about in education, because it's a really great way to like make money and to smart invest. And I think that I'd love to have a whole conversation about that, but I'm not going to. Can you tell us a little bit, and this is just me personally kind of fangirling, because I think we all grow up with the image of what Silicon Valley is like. And, that's where when we think of entrepreneurs, we think of Apple and Google, and that's kind of like the image. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience living there and kind of how your whole new movement got started and kind of what that's like?
So as I said, I'm a lifelong New Yorker. I moved to Silicon Valley about 11 years ago. To me, the first time I was here was fascinating, because you're driving down the street and you literally see, hey, there's Google and there's Apple and there's all these companies that are so well known that you've just known about your entire life, and they are literally all there in Silicon Valley. The couple of things that have impressed me about being out here is there is such a pay it forward mentality in Silicon Valley that everyone wants to help that next generation of entrepreneur. And it's really something that I've seen more here than anywhere else. When I was looking to get to know people or looking for my next thing after I left coupons.com, people said, oh, you should meet this person and that person and that person. And I would say of 100 people that people told me I should get together with 95 of them I ended up meeting with. And they were like, oh, I'm so happy to take the meeting. And, I love New York. I'm a lifelong New Yorker, but I don't know that it would be even close to that in New York. It's just a different mentality. And the measuring stick out here also is less about what car you drive or how much money you earn. The status symbol seems like it's almost more, what companies have you invested in? That's great that you did well for yourself, but how have you paid it back to the next generation of entrepreneur? And it's really a very supportive and fascinating way of community, I guess.
That's really interesting, because that's not the kind of stereotypical. I mean, California does have that reputation, but it's not really the stereotypical idea of Silicon Valley that we kind of see portrayed all the time. So that's really amazing that it's like that. And it makes me want to go there. I like that. You met all these cool people. You decided to leave coupons.com. How in the world did you make that jump from, I want to inspire young women and I want to write a book?
Yeah, I was looking for the next company to help grow and scale. I was meeting with a lot of visionaries and founders and CEOs. And the way I've spent my career is to let the visionary or the founder CEO focus on the vision and the product, and I run the day-to-day and scale and build the company. And that's sort of the partnership that's worked well in my career. And so that's what I was looking for. But two things happened. So I have two daughters that they're now 13 and 11. At the time, so my daughters were 8 and 6. And my older daughter was in the Girl Scouts, and she was selling cookies for the first time. And also in her second grade class, she was doing a charity bake sale. She and a friend had made brownies or cookies and were raising money for the local food bank. And both times she was so excited to be doing it. I remember when with the Girl Scout cookies, she put on the vest and she took the step stool down to the end of the driveway and she set up her cookies. But then she just stood there. Like she didn't actually know what to do. And people were walking by and she was just standing there. And it was actually my wife that said to her, hey, when people walk by, you should say good morning to get their attention. And she told her to make sure you look people in the eye when you talk to them. And when my daughter was doing the charity bake sale, my wife said, hey, tell people the money goes to charity, because even if they don't want to buy one of your brownies, maybe they'll still give you a few bucks. And I frankly was more entertained by the whole thing than anything else. I just thought it was really cute. And my daughter was sitting there not knowing what to do. But then fast forward to a Sunday morning. This is now June of 2014. I'm laying in bed reading books with my girls, and my older daughter was on my right side, and she was reading from the Who Was series. They're biographies for kids. They're fantastic. Who was Martin Luther King? Who was Leonardo da Vinci? Who was Derek Jeter? I mean, they're great. And so she was sitting there reading Who Was Queen Elizabeth. My younger daughter was on my other side, and she was in kindergarten, so I was reading to her. And as fate would have it, the book she picked for me to read to her was like the 57th book of the Rainbow Fairy series. And I just wanted to throw the thing out the window. First of all, the series is incredibly repetitive. I mean, the books feel like they're all exactly the same. But I also got frustrated at what I considered to be almost like a lowest common denominator marketing to girls. Like the idea that there was someone is sitting in a publishing house saying, well, we need to create a series for girls. So let's see, should we make it about a princess or a unicorn or a fairy? And don't forget to put a lot of pink on the cover. That was sort of what I was thinking. And look, I gave the Rainbow Fairies a ton of credit because it helped my daughter's imagination. It made her want to learn how to read. But my older daughter was getting the exact same benefit, and she was learning about Queen Elizabeth. For some reason, those two experiences combined in my brain. And I just said, I'm going to create, in my mind, it was a franchise to inspire girls to open up their first lemonade stand or bake sale and start that entrepreneurial journey and start to think like an entrepreneur. And it wasn't because I was thinking, let's create the next generation of female entrepreneur, although obviously if we could do that, that would be great. But it was more about instilling that entrepreneurial mindset. If we can get girls, and specifically I was thinking about my daughters, if we can get them to see problems and see opportunities instead of problem and develop that grit and the growth mindset and be able to sell something, be it a physical product or one of their ideas, and get comfortable with risk. And most importantly, realize that failure isn't what happens when you don't succeed. Failure is what happens if you don't try in the first place. My thinking was, if girls can develop that entrepreneurial mindset, they will be more successful in life regardless of the path that they choose. And so that was the moment of inspiration.
That's exactly the way that we see that mindset, that it's more about how you give and cultivate that mindset in young people so that it makes them winners no matter what. And especially the world that they're going into. It's so different than it was even for us. It's just so different. And they need to know how to tackle problems and persevere and find opportunity where other people wouldn't notice it. And it's incredible. I do have to make one comment, because this morning we had the TV on and my kids were watching a cartoon that shall remain nameless. I have two boys and they're 8 and 6. So this advertisement comes on for this new cartoon. I guess it's new. And it's called Rainbow Butterfly Unicorn Kitty. And I had that same feeling you did about the fairy tale, because I'm like it was like an explosion of girl marketing. Like, let me just take all of the things, all the stereotypical girl things, and smush them together into one cartoon.
My younger daughter actually gravitates to a lot of that stuff. And frankly, there's a lot of it that's empowering. There's a great series called The Princess in Black, and there's a lot of there's a lot of this same stuff that is very empowering for girls. But I wanted there to be even more of it. And to your point about the mindset, what I've seen with my own daughters is it's almost like a lemonade stand MBA. I mean, I've seen life lessons go on at the end of my driveway. And so one of my favorite stories was my daughter, her favorite place in the world is her summer camp. She goes away for a month to a sleepaway camp that's up in Sonoma. And 2 years ago, the camp was destroyed in the Napa-Sonoma fires. And so my daughter obviously was devastated, but she decided she was going to sell lemonade and brownies to help to raise money for the rebuild of the camp. So at the end of our driveway, she's set up her stand, and a guy pulls up and says, "What are you selling?" And she says, "Lemonade and brownies." And the guy says, "Oh, great, I'll take a glass of lemonade." And he hands her $1 and walks away. I explained to her that you don't always have to answer the question that has been asked. You can answer the question that you want to answer. And she said, "What do you mean?" And I explained a little bit to her. And about 2 minutes later, someone else pulled up, and the woman said, "What are you selling?" And my daughter said, "Well, my summer camp burned down, and so I'm selling lemonade and brownies to raise money for the rebuild." And the woman said, "I'll take a lemonade and a brownie. Here's $10, keep the change." And that's a life lesson out of a lemonade stand. And they've just seen it so many times. And so that's what really a big part of my inspiration is, just to get, kids and girls primarily to go out and open that first lemonade stand or bake sale and just start to learn some of these basic lessons.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And she's selling a benefit court. And we had a younger guy on earlier. He's a company called Tree Cup. He was selling tea originally for a long time. And then he realized the power of a social mission. And so Tree Cup became a thing. So it was buy a tea, plant a tree. And she's learning that at such a young age too, of how to have a mission behind what you're selling as well. I really love the idea. I wrote it down. That's why I wasn't responding when you stopped talking, because I was writing down this quote. This failure is what happens when you don't try in the first place. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the book itself and the main characters and kind of how you're instilling those lessons. And we don't want you to give away the whole book, obviously, but maybe a snippet, because we want to encourage people to go to get this for their young students and their young girls. But yeah.
So the Startup Squad, the target market is 8 to 12-year-olds. That scales up or down depending upon reading ability. But the book is divided into 3 parts, and I call them the inspiration, the information, and the aspiration. So the informational part is the narrative. This is a novel. So it's been described as the Babysitter's Club meets Lean In. Similar to the Babysitter's Club, it's about 4 characters. And each book is about the 4 characters, but each one will be from the perspective of one of the 4 characters. So with a primary focus on one of the 4 characters. So books 1, 5, and 9 are about the first character, and 2, 6, and 10 will be about the next character. The first part, in the inspirational part, is the story of these 4 6th grade girls whose class is going on a field trip to the local amusement park. And to raise money for the trip, all the kids get put into teams and they have to start lemonade stands. And so these 4 girls get thrown together on a team and have to try to run a lemonade stand. And it's a disaster. No one knows the first thing, and the leader doesn't know how to lead. And one character who's got a great sales pitch is more interested in playing with the animals that are nearby. They're really, really fun characters. And so the idea of that part is it's inspirational. You read a fun story about these girls who are running a lemonade stand, and they figure out how to do it. And you say, hey, that sounds like fun. I want to open up a lemonade stand too. And then at the end of the book, we have about 6 pages of nonfiction, which is the informational part, where we take the lessons or we take the story from the narrative and we translate it into the business concepts. So we'll say things like, hey, remember when the girls were making a big sign for their lemonade stand? Well, that's actually called marketing. And so here are some other marketing tips that you can use for your lemonade stand. And so each book is going to have 3 or 4 distinct business lessons. And so the first book we cover marketing, sales, merchandising, and location. So that's the informational part. And then the aspirational part is in the back of the book, we actually have an interview with a girlpreneur. We ran a national contest to try to find a girl to feature in the back of the book. We had 29 amazing girls enter, including, by the way, one girl who at the age of 13 was just the youngest person ever to be on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine. But our winner was an 11-year-old girl who lives outside of Atlanta, Georgia. Her name is Sarah Robinson, and her business is called Sarah Sews. And she makes aprons for kids and for dolls, and also cloth flag banners. And she's got a pretty substantial business selling on Amazon and Etsy. And so we have this 2-page interview in the back of the book, and that's sort of the aspirational part. So the idea is a girl would be inspired by the story and want to open up her lemonade stand. We give her the tools to be able to do it more successfully. And then we give her a role model to say, hey, I can actually turn this into a big business.
Oh, I love it.
That has so much potential. And I'm sure that you realize this, but for even like a teacher to take into a classroom and do a book study. We deal with teachers at Entre Ed a lot, and a lot of times they don't identify as entrepreneurial. And so the whole term kind of freaks them out sometimes. And so giving them that tool would be so powerful, and the kids would love the story. And then when they can get that story and then make that relevant connection between the story and the actual business concepts, and that's so, so powerful.
It's interesting you say that, because what we're doing right now, as a matter of fact, we're hoping to put the finishing touches on in the next couple of weeks, is the teacher's guide for the book will actually allow teachers to do that same exercise. So similar, the class competition to raise money for the trip to the amusement park, we are giving teachers the tools to be able to do that in their own classroom. So if they want to raise money for a field trip, or they want to raise money for a school, or they want to raise money for a local charity, they can read the book, and then the teacher's guide will give them a how-to about how to actually follow the plot and run the same competition in their classroom, and give their kids the entrepreneurial experience. And as I said, raise money for the school or a local cause that's near and dear to their heart.
My mind is just going all kinds of places in project-based learning right now.
Yeah.
This is so great. That's like a whole trajectory. You go from the book to like kind of the book study to then let's do this thing. I mean, what an incredible experience for students.
I mean, I know of a couple of teachers that are already doing, obviously they don't have as much of a scaffolded support as your book would be, but they've taken that approach to try to integrate entrepreneurship. They read a lesson or read a book on some kind of figure, and then they have to come up with a business related to that book. So I love the idea of connecting them to yours, because it's such a great resource for them to have, that they wouldn't have to do a lot of that pre-work at the front end to make those connections. It's just a natural thing. So yeah, I love that.
So I want to know, how much input did your daughters give you when you were writing the book? Or better yet,
are they a character?
Based on your daughters?
So my daughters certainly are characters, but they are not characters. They're not characters in the book. So this is a funny story. I purposely, for about the first 9 months that I was working on this, did not tell my daughters that my daughters knew that there was a book about entrepreneurship, but I didn't tell them that I was the one writing it. I told them it was a friend of mine, because I was afraid I needed their feedback. They were in the target market. And so I was afraid that if they knew it was me, they wouldn't give me their honest feedback. So I was telling them that this friend of mine was doing it. So one time I was working on a scene, and I realized I wanted something funny to happen in that scene. And so I said to my older daughter, I said, hey, my friend was looking for something funny to happen in the scene. What do you think? And I said, what do you think? Someone should burp, or someone should, someone's underwear. Like, what would be funny? And she gave me an idea, and I was like, oh, that's a really good idea. I'll tell my friend. When my daughter goes to sleep, I crank out the pages of that scene. And when my daughter wakes up in the next morning, I was like, hey, I spoke to my friend. He really liked your idea. Here, what do you think? And she read it, and she goes, that's funny. And so I was like, okay, so that was in the original manuscript. But I didn't tell them it was me that was writing it. They were really into it, and they were providing a lot of feedback. But I was going to the San Francisco Writers Conference one weekend, and it happened to be on Valentine's Day. And I was going to be away for Valentine's Day. And my daughters were like, Daddy, you can't be away for Valentine's Day. How can we not spend Valentine's Day together? And so I had to tell them. And so I told them, the story that we're talking about, it really isn't a friend. It's me. I've been the one writing it. After we finished this little short conversation, my daughters both ran away. And then they came back a little while later. My older daughter came back with 2 books in her hand. She said, Daddy, because I was telling them how I'm learning how to write and I'm not a writer. And I was going through this whole process of trying to learn how to write. So my daughter came back to me, my older daughter came back with 2 books. And she said, the first was Harry Potter. And she said, here, Dad, this one's a really good book. You can use it. If you need an example of want to read a really good book, here's this one. And then she handed me a book called, I think it's like My Weird and Wacky Writing Tips. It was the book that she was using in 3rd grade in her English. And so she's like, here, you can use this as well. A little while later, my younger daughter comes back and she had drawn what she wanted to be the cover art to the book. I still have that art. And to this day, and I still keep it. It's not the art on the cover of the actual book, but I kept that. And so that was and so they've been great. And all their friends have been great as well. And just giving them copies of the manuscript to read and getting feedback. What's great is these kids are not shy about telling you what they like and what they don't like. And no, it's great. So I actually had I think she was an 11 at the time. And again, I'm not, we can talk a little bit about this, but I'm a business guy. I'm not a writer. And so I had this idea and I literally had to teach myself how to write. So I knew nothing. I gave my original, one of the earliest versions of the manuscript to an 11-year-old girl to read. And she pointed out a grammatical error that I had made 127 times in that first manuscript. And it's a basic thing. When you're quoting a line of dialogue, let's go to the park, said Bill. When you close the quote after the word park, you have to include a comma. It has to be, let's go to the park, comma, close quote, said Bill. Yeah, well, you're both like, yeah, of course you need the comma there. How was I supposed to know that? I didn't know that. But this 11-year-old girl was like, you forgot the comma after the quote. They were fantastic, and I learned a tremendous amount from my daughters and her friends, and a ton of people along the way were kind enough to give me honest feedback about how bad my writing was to be able to feel I could make it better and get to this point.
That was kind of my next question is, you just decided to do this, which is awesome and very entrepreneurially minded, by the way, but to just start this and not have that experience as a writer or exposure, because there's a lot of people out there that have this book, the idea, and it never happens because that fear is paralyzing. Like, what if I can't do this? I mean, and that's a hard age group to write for too, especially when you're not an 11-year-old girl. Yeah. What other hurdles did you have to push through when you were working on?
Well, it's interesting. You said, there's a lot of people that don't know what to do or don't know how to share it. One of the biggest things for me early on was exposing myself. Make something creative and expose yourself and share it with someone is a really hard thing. And I'm sure a lot of people out there listening might be closet writers or closet painters or singers or do things creatively. It's really hard to take that first step and share it with someone. And what's funny is when I first started this, I didn't know whether I was going to be able to do this, and I was in my mind whether this was going to actually be a thing. And so I was still talking to people about jobs and companies to help scale and build. And so when I had the first version of the manuscript and I wanted people to read it, I sent it to friends of mine in New York. I didn't give it to anyone in Silicon Valley because in case it was so embarrassingly, awfully bad, I didn't want word to get out and to kill my job prospects here. But I figured in New York, I was a little bit safer. And so that was really one of the first things I did. This was the story of creating a book to get girls inspired around entrepreneurship was an entrepreneurial journey. I mean, everything you hear about, we talk about with risk and failure and naysayers. I lived it all through this process. The first hurdle was just not knowing how to write. Truly, one of the first things I did after I had this idea is I went out, I bought writing children's books for dummies. I mean, that was one of the they do. And I got to tell you, I've read now probably 20 different books about writing for kids, including college level textbooks. And one of the best ones I read was writing children's books for dummies. So I read a ton of books about writing. I took writing classes at local colleges. I hired freelance editors to work with me. I went to writing conferences, just doing all of that. The failures were pretty significant. As a matter of fact, the first person I ever met with in this journey in the publishing industry was a friend of a friend who was an agent at a pretty high-powered literary agency in New York City. And I really had barely started writing. I just had the concept of what I wanted to do, but I was learning about the publishing industry. And so someone introduced me to her. And over the course of our meeting, and she was great, she gave me a lot of great information about the industry. But over the course of the meeting, when I talked a little bit about the idea, she said, if I were your friend, I would tell you not to waste your time. And that was one of the first things I ever did. And the first meetings I ever had. And I really remember I went downstairs and I left her office and I stood in the lobby of her building on Fifth Avenue in New York City. And I called my wife and my wife said, how did it go? And I said, it was awesome. She told me if she was my friend, she'd tell me not to waste her time. And my wife, so you could expect there's sort of silence on the other end of the line for a little while. And my wife was like, well, so what was so awesome about this? And I told her that I had heard to get a book published, you're going to get 100 no's before you get a yes. That rejection is part of the process. This was my first rejection. And I survived. I wasn't physically injured. I wasn't mentally scarred. I wasn't bleeding. And I knew that I would be able to get past all the other rejections I was going to get after having received that one rejection. That ability to withstand rejection was tested a few months later when I went to a writer's conference. And one of the things you can do at these writer's conferences is you can submit the first 10 pages of your manuscript to an editor at a publishing house, and they'll give you feedback. So I submitted my 10 pages and I went to the conference and I went to the meeting with this editor, and I, in the back of my mind, I know she was going to have the publishing contract sitting there waiting for me as soon as I got there, and I went and she was so brutal. In the comment, she hands me back the manuscript and, think of like a Word doc with comment bubbles on the side. And the comment bubbles were just, each one was like more brutal than the next. She was basically literally and figuratively saying, you cannot do this and you're wasting my time. Next to one comment, I think there was like a line of, it was like dialogue of two scenes between two of these girls. Her comment bubble said something along the lines of, I was surprised to learn you had girls yourself. Like the writing was so bad.
Ow.
But the truth is, she was absolutely right. It was awful. I mean, I go back and I look at what I submitted now and I'm like, oh my God, what was I thinking? But it created a decision tree for me, which made me realize that this was going to be a lot harder than I thought. And I was like, oh, I'll just write a book. No, whatever, here we go. And I'll read some books and do whatever. And it was pretty obvious that I was out of my league and it was going to take a lot more work to get this done. That was probably the biggest decision tree I had. And I had just come from this San Francisco Writers Conference that I mentioned earlier. And while I was there, a guy had heard my pitch and what I was working on. And he came up to me in the hallway and he said, I love what you're doing. I've got a 4-year-old daughter. When she's 8, this is the book I want her to read. I'm a freelance children's book editor. How can I help? And at that same conference where I got this, this brutal critique, I had met with a couple of agents, literary agents, and I sort of told them what I was working on. And they said, we love the idea. We'd love to see the manuscript. And so I knew that there was something there. And I also knew that I had this opportunity where this guy was offering me some resources to help, but I had to decide whether this was something that I wanted to commit to spend another 6 or 9 months working on, because that's how long it would take to work with this guy and rewrite it. And for a number of reasons, including the fact that this woman had just told me, you can't do this, I decided to push forward. I think it was about 2 years after that critique that I ended up signing my 3-book deal with Macmillan.
That is so amazing. But hey, I want to make sure that we're aware of, the listeners' time. We do this typically in a commute type time limit so that they have a short one. There was something else we want to quickly talk about here. Is this 100 Inspiring 100 campaign that you're working on? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that program?
Yeah, it's funny because the inspiration for this really came from the Entre Ed conference in Pittsburgh last fall. So I frankly did not know that much about Entre Ed. I knew that there was a conference of entrepreneurship educators. I was trying to learn what entrepreneurship education was like as I was thinking about teachers' guides and how to bring this book to schools. And so I went to the conference and I was blown away by Entre Ed and by the educators I saw and the things that you were doing to bring entrepreneurship education to these kids in rural communities, and hearing the stories of these teachers about how these kids, these towns are struggling and these students are struggling and they need role models, and how entrepreneurship education can help them become more resilient even if they don't want to start a business. And I was really impacted by it. And so I left Pittsburgh and I was flying to New York, and on the plane I was reading Inc. magazine. And it happened to be the issue where they have the 100 female founders. And so here I am looking at this list of 100 amazing women who are role models. We're just talking about how we need role models for the kids. Here are 100 role models and 100 women that would probably want to give back and help this next generation. And so that was the moment of inspiration for 100 Inspiring 100. And what that program is, I partnered with Girls Inc. of New York City. Girls Inc. is a fantastic national organization. Their group in New York City works with underserved girls in the 5 boroughs of New York. And 100 Inspiring 100 was a mission to find 100 female leaders, and we use that term very broadly, to each donate 100 copies of the Startup Squad to 100 girls in need. And so what we did was we raised money for Girls Inc. that they would use to buy copies of the book at a discounted price from Macmillan, and then anything I make on the book, I'm donating back to Girls Inc. as well. And we also asked these female leaders to also provide one tip for a girl opening up her first lemonade stand. Because I didn't want to just have the girls say to the girls, hey, here's a book, which is great, but I also wanted to give them some role models and also a little bit of mentoring. And so we ended up getting, I think we've so far collected tips from about 50 female business leaders, and we've raised enough money to donate. I think we're pretty close to 7,000 copies of the book to give to these girls at Girls Inc. And so it's been a fantastic program, and the girls are going to be getting the books in the next couple of weeks, and I hope to meet with them shortly thereafter. But
that is incredible.
Yeah, truly all inspired by the Entre Ed conference in Pittsburgh.
Oh, my heart's so warmed. I love that kind of stuff. Yeah, no, that's amazing. And we're so appreciative that Entre Ed brought you to us and that we were able to meet you and learn from you. So where can they find more information about the Startup Squad? When's it come out? How would somebody go about getting that?
Sure. So first of all, our website, thestartupsquad.com, has a ton of resources. One, a lot of information about the book. We've got a lot of our blog content about raising entrepreneurial girls and features about girl entrepreneurs. We also have book reviews of other books that have entrepreneurial content to them. So thestartupsquad.com is the place to start for all that information. But the Startup Squad is going to be available in bookstores across the country on Tuesday, May 7th. It's available for pre-order before then on all the major booksellers. But come May 7th, it should be in your local bookstore, chain bookstores. You could buy it online. I believe Target is going to be stocking the book nationally as well.
And we're going to try to get this podcast published on May 7th. So if you're listening, it is available today. Please go and get the Startup Squad.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, this has been super inspiring, and I know I'm fired up to go talk to some young women and get them inspired about entrepreneurship. So I can't thank you enough for your time.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm looking forward to seeing everyone in Lexington this fall.
Awesome. Well, we're looking forward to actually seeing you again in real life. And we're really appreciative of your time today, Brian, and so inspired by your story. Thank you so much for being here. This is amazing.
Great. Thank you.